Hello, everyone, and welcome to the sixth episode of Keeping Up with the Ambassadors. We have a new guest today. Hi, Visa.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Hi, everyone. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. It's an honor to have you here, and I'm excited for our conversation today. Just a little bit of context first for the new listeners and for the old ones as well. Just a reminder that this format, Keeping Up with the Ambassadors, is my attempt to sort of learn what our Charney ambassadors are doing. And the Charney Ambassador Program is a sort of collaboration between the Charney Resolution Center, founded by Tsili, and the Eastern Mediterranean International School, which is a peace and dialogue focused school in the Middle East, in Tel Aviv. And so the goal of this program is to sort of build a network between the alumni, people who graduated from EMIS, so that they can bring the mission of the school and the mission of Charney, which is fostering dialogue and peace across the globe, and bring it to whatever the university they're in, the new countries they visit, the new projects they engage with. So that's really the focus here. And I'm excited to have a new one, Visa, hi, from the class of 2022, right? Yeah. And also we've been talking with the other newcomers, Adea and Noah, and we're excited for new projects. So yeah, why don't you start by introducing yourself a little bit? Tell me where you're from, when you graduate to EMIS,
Yeah, so my name is Visa. I'm from Vietnam. I'm EMIS class of 2022, and currently I'm the first year at Trinity College, which is a liberal arts college in Connecticut, the US.
Okay, and how's your experience at EMIS? Like, let's look back a little bit. How were your 2 years there?
So I guess for us, because in 2021, our first year, it was still a lot, like COVID impacted in a way that it stopped us from having the same kind of event. Or like, for example, like most events, like Yoko Pass was online, or like the mission week, we couldn't actually go outside. We need to like go back to our dorm to sleep during the night. So that was really different. So I guess kind of because of that, that kind of inspired me to, for my second year, I joined the Yoko Pass and the Mission Week committee so that I could bring like the actual feelings of how those initiatives of those events should be like for emissaries. So that's, yeah.
And tell me about it. I didn't know you organized Yokobus and Mission Week. That sounds great. What do you think? How was the process for you? I know it's always hectic to organize these big school events. How was it?
So I guess like the biggest difficulty was because none of us in like the committees, except for like those that went from Pretty P, knew about how those events should be like. So for us, it was a lot of like trying to negotiate with the school or like with like Rahal or with Hadas on how we would want things to be, how realistic would they actually be, and trying to kind of mediate from this like still really COVID driven like world to the more like COVID normalized world in which, because it was like contacting guest speakers, some of them couldn't come, or some of them only then they said that they wouldn't want to go because they had COVID. So that was a lot of trying to bring things back to normal, but not really.
Yeah, it was not fully normal yet. And
Yeah.
it's crazy to think how much COVID impacted your experience at EMIS and how it's sort of like limited. So I'm curious to say, do you think it also like it brought some benefits, or like having all these constraints of like having to do things online, having to double check everything, like you think there was some benefit extracted from it at the end, or was it all bad?
No, we are totally like being able to be more flexible with things and to like have like all these different plans in case something happens. That really prepared us. And I feel like that was like a really precious experience in terms of like organizing events.
Yeah.
And also it kind of helped because now that for example in terms of guest speakers or in terms of like location that we needed to come out for Mission Week, we had to do a lot of research, which I think gave us a lot of resources. And that was really good.
Yeah, you're right. I like what you said. And I think even though it was challenging for most of us, it is true that COVID sort of like was a reality check on how unpredictable life is. And it's the same for event planning. It's the same for projects. It's the same for probably the work you'll be doing with us at Charney. It's like there's all these variables that you can predict, and one of the best skills we can develop. And I think that's something that EMIS teaches you well in working on projects like the peace simulation, like Yokopass really, really teaches you, is this skill of like flexibility and adaptability and having, yes, a structure and a plan, but also always being ready at the last moment to like change the venue and change the guest speakers and invite new people. So yeah, that's a good point. And I'm curious to hear from a bit of a more like personal side, how has it been finishing your EMIS chapter and being out there in the big scary world?
Wow. So I guess like the biggest change is to actually, because for example in my school, at least for the internationals, they're really politically correct, like in the American term, that I started to have to narrate my story back in EMIS in a way that it would fit whichever audience I'm talking to. So for example, I stopped introducing myself that I learned in an international boarding school in Israel. And more like I have to twist it to say that I learned in the school in Tel Aviv. So that really like exposed me like to like the outside the EMIS bubble in which like whatever we said back in EMIS were within this like kind of like these boundaries that everyone accepted us, and they knew that we were gonna say that. And now outside the real world, there's so many different perspectives that weren't really featured during the EMIS journey that I have to curate myself towards. So that was like a really big change in terms of kind of identity, but also like introduction with what I did.
Yeah, you're right. And it's hard when we're not sort of anymore in these like protected bubbles, protected communities, to sort of like be faced with just how deeply diverse people are in terms of opinion, but also how like, I don't know how to say it, but like how many people just according to where they grew up with, like without giving faults, but they just have opinions that are very much in contrast with what we got used to at EMIS. And even if we both know EMIS was no perfect place, there was this sort of like foundational like acceptance and maybe willingness to listen. And I agree that it's challenging to not find that in other places. And so how have you like, how has your time been at Trinity College? What are some of the, like, what are you focusing on? What are you investing your time in?
So I'm kind of taking advantage of the liberal arts curriculum. So which means that I can take like whichever courses I want as long as I finish my degree. So for now, I'm taking classes to basically like enhance my understanding about the conflict that I couldn't really have back in EMIS. Because back in EMIS, we were given like this more like foundational knowledge that, okay, these are like the historical events that happened. What could have been the causes behind them? What are like, why are people acting like that in Jerusalem? So now I'm taking classes like religions of Asia, in which to understand more about like what is beyond that religious activity, that religious motive that actually made them do that, that made them justify the decision. So it was more like learning the factors that were probably like too deep into the topic that couldn't be really talked about back in EMIS. So
Oh,
I've been taking a step back to take courses like that.
that's interesting. And do you have any particular like new perspective or new reflection that you've had taking these classes about like world religions or politics that you can sort of like backward apply to EMIS and the conflict? Do you have any like cool insight to share?
So I guess like the insight that I had from EMIS back when like I was like listening to all like the experience in terms of religions, that and because I was like more like an atheist back then, that I felt like they weren't they weren't that valid for me. But now that I'm taking classes and I understand that not like the or like this so we have this concept of like Orientalism, which is more like how the West view the Eastern part of the world, especially towards like Islam. So from that, like taking the classes, I really realized that I got somewhat influenced by that thought as well, despite being an Asian. So it kind of links all back to me being able to look back and realize that people have their own reason, and for that I should respect them. But in the same way, now that I understand those perspectives more, I should be able to mediate between them.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And something I also struggle with a lot is sort of like the balance between like, yes, we're trying to understand where you're coming from, and I want to try and understand why you have whatever opinion you hold, whether it's on the conflict, whether it's on anything else. But then also, and I think that's something that Emma's taught us a bit, but it was always a bit in this like protected bubble, as we were saying, is like sometimes it's just not okay. And sometimes you have to sort of like stand up for what you're defending. And there's a difference between like understanding and empathizing from where someone's coming from, whether it's religious belief, whether it's family traditions, whatever, and sort of like accepting it or like not saying anything against it. Yeah, so I'm wondering, have you like is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict something that like is spoken about on your campus? Like, do people have opinions on it? And yeah.
So I think like a really interesting thing that I experienced was that, so now I'm currently working at the Hillel House, which is like a Jewish community on campus. Because really like for the first semester here, like I felt like I wasn't able to reconnect with or like recreate what I did back in EMIS. So that's why I applied for that job. And the rabbi literally, she told me the story of how there used to be an Israeli flag really big in the house. But then there was like event on like anti-Semitism in which everyone came together. And there was some Palestinian that also came to that event. So she felt like it shouldn't be put there to affiliate Judaism and Israel that directly. So she changed it into like a smaller flag and put it in like not like right in front of the house, to at least like to not entirely eradicate the identity of like Israeli who are Jewish, but also to make it at least more welcoming for Palestinians to enter the house and learn about Judaism and like the Israeli perspective if they would want to.
Okay. And I'm curious to hear, what type of work have you been doing in this house organization?
So I'm working as the Shabbat and holidays intern. So it's more like just helping with organizing events that are like Jewish holidays or like events like, as I mentioned, like anti-Semitic talk, as in talks about like anti-Semitism on campus like that.
Is that an issue that is there a lot?
Yeah, like literally since coming to the US, I realized that because back in EMIS, we lived in a campus in which people mostly locals. So that wasn't like a topic that would be brought up. And also because it was Israel. But since coming here, I realized that anti-Semitism in the US is a really big issue. And that made me realize even more of the bubble that we lived in back then.
And what about like, how do you think the things or your experience at EMIS sort of like is helping you right now to sort of like engage and like confront yourself with these new reality that maybe sometimes are less accepting or just like simply less bubble, less protected?
So the experience in EMIS, it kind of prepared me in a way that I knew that this thing could happen. So in a way, I was more aware that, oh, this thing happened, and I've been told about that, about how people treated each other. But I didn't really expect the extremity that I would get, like the extremity of anti-Semitism or like Islamophobia that we have here in the US. Like I didn't really know that it could get that bad. So I guess that coming to the US, it changed my perspective a lot, that there are really bad people around the world, and those are the people that I hope that like the initiative that we have at the Charney Center will be able to help with.
Yeah, and what do you think? Because you're right that at EMIS people are like already very motivated to sort of like engage with these issues and talk and dialogue and the peace simulation, like all these activities. But in the real world or in the outside world, people just like care less to change their opinions, and they're sort of a bit more stuck in them. And so how do you think we can bridge that? Or how do you see your role as like a young student trying to navigate these issues?
So for me, back in EMIS, I realized a part of what I did was to focus more on the education part. And also with like the initiative at EMIS, it was more about trying to educate people first before bridging what dialogues between them. So that would be something that I want to focus on later on as like I move on with trying to work with Trinity Center would be to focus on the education part. And from like one project that I would love to do is to first do the research on how other school, especially UWC, who kind of have like this similar pattern and like the similar mission with us, on how peace would, if ever like peace projects or like peace initiative were conducted there or like talked about there. Because sometimes like I question myself that it was only because EMIS was situated in that very specific location that we got to learn about that. But what if the school was located like, for example, like in another country, then what would the story be like? What would they even care about talking about conflicts that are happening around the world? So that would be something that I'm really interested in to look for. And based on that, I would want to see like how how we can create a peace curriculum, more like a course about how to educate peace in like specifically about the conflict, the Israeli and Palestinian conflict, but also about like how should high school students be exposed to those conflicts.
Okay, interesting. Okay. The first time I hear about this, and it sounds quite exciting. And so I'm curious to understand a bit more like what you're envisioning. Like your idea would be to create a sort of like hands-on peace curriculum that can be offered in different schools, high
Yeah,
school.
not
What's the
really like
target audience?
not really like a curriculum, but more like a benchmark of how like what because usually we got introduced to the Israeli and Palestine conflict because we knew that we were in that location and that we were also doing like we were also having the global politics like subject in the IB. But for schools that where they're not really exposed or like located in an area that are more like internationally driven or that they don't have the capacity to have courses related to politics, then if they want to do that, how would they be able to introduce it in a way that is not like forcing the students to be like, oh, you're living here, but you need to care about situation in other countries. So like trying to create this sympathy and motivation for students to be more aware about the world situations.
And why do you think that's important? Like why should
Because I think that the reason why that you also talk about how they are bad people and how there are people that are really unwilling to talk about is because they surrounded by a community in which people are really like they're not close-minded in a way, but they only allow one narrative, and because of that,
it all stays in it?
yeah, like they live in their own bubble. And but now that we can actually like motivate the new generation, like the new youth, to be exposed to the other perspective or like the other narratives or the other situation around the world, since like not a young age, but in a way in the age that they're still at school, but they still can form their own like understanding. Then if we were able to give students that kind of understanding starting from that age, then maybe in the future each one of them can be a game changer in the way that they're willing to talk about their opinions, they're willing to listen to other people's opinions, and they're willing to help other people to do the same thing.
Okay, that's great. And I'm happy to hear you're interested in working on this. And so to sort of like close the circle a little bit, I was kind of curious to hear, other than maybe this like peace curriculum project, what are some of the other things that you want to work on while being a Charney ambassador, or what is really pushing you to becoming a Charney ambassador?
So what really pushed me to be like a Charney Center ambassador was that I wanted to continue with what I know already about the conflict back in EMIS and continue it later on. Because sometimes for for me it feels like EMIS just ends and there will be no like local paths, there will be no peace simulation in which I can just go to and learn more. So being a Chani Resolution Center ambassador would give me the opportunity to also work with like the other ambassadors on enriching our knowledge and talking about our experience so that the upcoming alumni or like upcoming emissaries can know what would be there for them to expect after they graduate.
And do you have any concrete ideas on how you would like to do
Now
it?
I already discussed with Noah and Adea about the podcast. So we already discussed like this one topic for the upcoming podcast. And I guess that would be like a concurrent project that we'll be all working on. So that like so we'll just
What's
cover
the
topics
topic?
that
I'm curious to hear.
like we're gonna talk about our DP1 experience and more specifically the period in which there was like the missile attack and the siren. So we would reflect on that and kind of discuss about how that shaped our experience and shaped our understanding.
Okay, that's good to hear. And yeah, that's great. I think we're reaching the end of our lovely conversation, and I'm very happy to keep working on you and with the other ambassadors on these new projects. I think you have any final message to give to our audience, or?
Well, I guess that I'm really excited to be able to work as an ambassador, and I really hope that we can bring values to the audience.
Yeah, that's good. I'm excited to see what you'll bring to the platform. And yeah, thank you to our listener for tuning in today, and we'll keep you updated on the progress. And welcome Visa to the Charney family. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.